Brethren, a very warm welcome to you all. It's a pleasure to see you as always. And I'm glad to see some faces that have missed the last few back on with us today. As usual, I'm going to start with some housekeeping. The meeting is being recorded and will be posted onto our YouTube channel. Therefore, those of you who do not wish to be seen, please do feel free to turn your videos off now. To avoid any disruptions during the talk, could you please also ensure that your microphones are kept on mute throughout, please? There will be an open Q&A session after the talk, and if you'd like to ask a question, please use the hand up icon. Now this can be found in the participant section on Zoom. If you look to the bottom of your screens, you'll see a participant section there. If you go into there, you'll be able to put your hand up using that one. Please do not use the reactions button, as it's very difficult to see all of you on one page. So if you could do that, that'd be fantastic. To give everyone a chance, obviously, an opportunity to ask their question, if you could please stick to one question at a time. And if we could keep it related to today's talk. I know Tony did a talk back in June for us, but if you do have any questions regarding that talk, you can email Tony later on separately. So please do keep questions to this talk and this talk only. Thank you. Once again, we're giving away 2 of our mugs, so for a chance to win, please answer the following question. Now, this will test your skills, brethren, and see if you've actually listened back to Tony's original talk. In what year did Tony begin his Masonic journey? Please write your answers in the chat section on Zoom, and the first 2 answers, or the first 2 quickest answers, will win. Brethren, it is now my pleasure to introduce you to very worshipful brother Tony. Our next speaker, he needs no introduction really. He's well known to most of us and delighted us with his first talk, which was the historic links between the Craft, Royal Arch and Mark degrees back in June. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome back very worshipful brother Tony Harvey.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Amit, and thank you everyone for turning up to part 2. You'd be forgiven having heard the first one for not coming to this one. And incidentally, I'm looking at the dates you're putting into the chat area as to when I started my Masonic journey, and I'm making notes about those who are putting it into the 19th century, incidentally. So as I say, thank you very much for the invitation. Thanks for having me back. And hopefully you can now see my slides on there. So as I said before, I'm a regular contributor to the growing number of Masonic Facebook groups, and I'm still concerned by the widespread misunderstanding about the links between the principal degrees in Freemasonry, which, as before, is the subject of this talk. And it seems that we continue to confuse the historical development of the degrees with the stories that they tell and the symbolic links between them. So this paper was inspired by a 2004 paper by Right Worshipful Brother T.T. Kuravilla of the Grand Lodge of India, and I acknowledge his work. My talk on the same theme is based on the relationship and the development in the English Constitution and on the narrative in our degree ceremonies, and of course on my own research. What I'm trying to do is to resolve some of that confusion and to provide a useful base for cooperation between the adherents of the degrees, of which I am very proud to include myself. Now, back in part 1, I examined the historic and constitutional links, and I think I established that the Master Mason's degree, the Mark degree, and the Royal Arch were all developed during a 50-year period by a relatively small group of people. One person in particular, Thomas Dunkerley, played a major part in developing the words of all 3 rituals. And those rituals therefore developed as part of one common system. The current relationship between these degrees, in England and Wales at least, and their governance or management came about as a result of a fudged compromise at the 1813 Union, which formed the United Grand Lodge of England. Now that relationship is unique to the English Constitution, and it's often perplexing to ourselves, let alone others. So in this second part, I want to address the narrative and symbolic links. That is the continuity between the stories that are told within the degrees and the way in which their symbols and their meaning are connected. Although in the English Constitution, the Craft, Mark and Royal Arch are governed by separate sovereign Grand Lodges or chapters, There are many links between them that have survived a breaking up of a Masonic jigsaw. Indeed, I suggest that knowledge of these links is essential for an understanding of parts of the craft degrees, as well as the Mark and the Royal Arch. But I should point out that what follows is my own interpretation of just some of those narrative and symbolic links. I couldn't possibly cover all of them in the time available, and you may identify others, and you may, of course, come to a very different opinion. So let's start with the links between the craft and the Royal Arch. The narrative link is that the secrets lost in the third degree are found in the Royal Arch. So they're like two chapters in a book, continuing the same story. When the three ruffians demanded the secrets of a master mason from Hiram Abiff, he told them those secrets were known to but three in the world, and that without the consent and cooperation of the other two Grand Masters, he neither could nor would divulge them. Yet later, when King Solomon learned of the death of Hiram Abiff, he said, by his untimely death, the secrets of a master mason were lost. Now, the craft mason may now be very confused. If three people knew the secrets, how can the death of just one of those three result in their loss? Well, it's in the Royal Arch degree that we learn that the genuine secrets operate by the three Grand Masters acting jointly and cooperating with each other. It is like safes that have two or more keys, each held by a different person. Each person has to agree to use their individual keys at the same time before the safe can be opened. According to Hollywood, launches of nuclear weapons would operate in the same way. In a similar manner, the three Grand Masters had to cooperate with each other and coordinate their actions to communicate the genuine secrets. Now, Royal Archmasons will be familiar with the process by which this happens. Therefore, the death of one Grand Master resulted in the inability of the others to complete the communication of the secrets, and it was in this sense that they were lost. In the third degree, King Solomon went on to define substituted secrets and declared that they should designate all master masons throughout the universe until time or circumstances should restore the genuine. Now, this implies, brethren, that the genuine secrets were not permanently or irrevocably lost, only temporarily. The Grand Masters had deposited them, as it happens, in a secret vault, the location or even existence of which was then lost over time. So if in future the secret vault is discovered, then the secrets will be recovered. And this is precisely what happens in the Royal Arch. Now, what is actually discovered in the Royal Arch ceremony is perhaps not what the candidate is expecting. If he is thinking as a craft mason, which of course is most likely, he will be anticipating further modes of recognition. That is, a pattern of signs, tokens, and words to be used to prove his qualifications and gain future access to a meeting of Royal Arch Masons. While the ceremony certainly includes these elements, they are not the genuine secrets of a master mason. For the operative stonemasons, the secrets that were reserved then to the master mason, who was an architect and master builder, were the use of the right-angled 3-4-5 triangle to form geometric shapes. To us as speculative Freemasons, the secret that is actually discovered in the Royal Arch is our spiritual nature and God's divine truth. Both versions of these genuine secrets, the operative and the speculative, require three to communicate and operate them. And this is what Hiram Abiff was referring to when he declined to reveal what only he and the other Grand Masters knew. The Royal Arch does indeed complete what was started in the craft, not just the third degree, just as our spiritual nature completes us as men. And I explore this further in a talk I'm developing called, at least what's called at the moment, What is Freemasonry's Fascination with Completion? And that is a talk for Royal Arch companions only. So this symbolic rather than practical interpretation of the lost secrets brings us to the thematic or symbolic links between the third degree and the Royal Arch. Now, many aspects of the Royal Arch continue elements from the ceremony of the veils. However, there are also symbols from the third degree that are continued in the Royal Arch. The final steps, for example, taken by a candidate for the third degree on his approach to the pedestal differ from those taken in other craft ceremonies. They're not in the form of a square. The candidate for the Royal Arch continues in the same direct way. In both the third degree and the Royal Arch, the candidate approaches the pedestal or altar with 7 steps, although in different forms. The aprons of both degrees also have 7 tassels, not seen on any other regalia. And 7 is significant in the craft as being the number required to make a lodge perfect. It also represents the 7 liberal arts and sciences, the study of which was necessarily to be a complete earthly man. 7 was the most sacred number to the Hebrews. In the Old Testament, 7 relates directly to God, to creation, to completion and perfection. At one point in the third degree, there is reference to companions, the name used by Royal Arch Masons to refer to each other. A companion is not just someone we work with, but someone we break bread with, travel or live with. In professional bodies, it is the most senior grade achievable, and it's offered only to a select few. When used in orders of chivalry, companion is the grade immediately below that of knighthood. Some have suggested the reference is a signpost from the third degree to the Royal Arch as being the natural destination for craft masons. Then there are parallels between the 5 points of fellowship, the 5 signs in the third degree, and the 5 signs of the Holy Royal Arch. The Royal Arch ritual reminds us that the 5 points of fellowship point out our duties to each other and informs us that the 5 Royal Arch signs mark the relation we bear to the Most High. This passage emphasizes the craft as being concerned with earthly or human relationships, and the Royal Arch has been concerned with the spiritual. So what then are the links between the craft and the mark degrees? The narrative of the craft and mark both relate to the building of King Solomon's temple. More specifically, those of the third degree and the Mark Master Mason's degree are almost like 2 scenes in the same act of a play. The mark actually comprises 2 degrees, that's Mark Man and Mark Master Mason, both of which are conferred at the same meeting. Now, some consider the mark to be the completion of the fellowcraft degree. It's that word completion again. The degree of Mark Man, during which a fellowcraft is awarded his own distinguishing mark, certainly logically follows the second degree. Having a mark meant that the qualified and skillful craftsman could earn his own wages. The degree of Mark Master Mason, however, is very different. It's not related to the second degree. The candidate in the mark ceremony, who is later described in the mark lecture as ingenious and intelligent, undertakes on his own initiative a piece of work which is initially rejected. It is only later that its true worth is recognized, demonstrating the value of hope and perseverance. The creator of this novel piece of work is then rewarded by being promoted to the degree of Mark Master Mason. That novel piece of work was needed to complete the sacred arch of King Solomon's temple, which was the final building act of the project, rather like topping out. So the events in the narrative or story of the Mark Master Mason's degree occur very close in time to, and probably within days of, those of the third degree. In every jurisdiction, it is only conferred on Master Masons. So the mark does not complete the fellowcraft degree at all. But what exactly is a Mark Master Mason? We don't encounter them in the craft, or do we? Well, we do, but we may not realize it. Some knowledge of the mark degrees is required if we are to truly understand certain parts of the Master Mason's degree. For example, Many believe that it was fellowcrafts who conspired to extort the secrets from Hiram Abiff. Sorry, they're incorrect. The ritual of the third degree refers to 15 fellowcrafts of that superior class, and it gives their job title as the monarchin or prefects, or more familiarly speaking, the overseers. And the craft tells us nothing more about these supervisors. To know about the organisation of the workers at the building of King Solomon's Temple, we must refer to the Mark. The Mark lecture explains that there were 110,000 employed in the building of the temple. Now, brethren, imagine such a workforce in an organisation today. It's the number currently employed by McDonald's. It's the number that was employed by both Apple and Amazon in the year 2013. To enable appropriate supervision and management of such a vast number, Hiram Abiff organised these 110,000 workers into 1,100 lodges of entered apprentices and fellowcrafts. And he then appointed 3 supervisors called monarchin, overseers or mark masters over each lodge. That's making 3,300 in total. Now clearly they too needed some organisation. So in fact they were themselves organised into 100 lodges with 33 in each. These supervisors, the monarchin, overseers or mark master masons, met with King Solomon and with Hiram Abiff, the chief architect, once in every 6 days to receive the working plans as well as the instructions for carrying on the work. Promotion to the rank of master mason was only available to these supervisors, that is the monarchin, prefects, overseers or the mark master masons. And therefore, in the third degree, or the story of the third degree, the 3 ruffians being of that superior class and disappointed not to have been promoted when the project was very clearly coming to an end, conspired to extort the secrets from Hiram Abiff. And the third degree, of course, tells us what happens next. Finally, when King Solomon was informed of the absence of Hiram, he selected 15 trusty fellowcrafts and he ordered them to make a diligent search after the person of our master. Note, he did not select his searchers from the supervising class, the mark master masons, who, one could argue, might stand to gain from Hiram's death. So as for the symbolic links between the craft and the mark, there are many, as the mark adopts many of the craft's symbols. The lecture on the mark tracing board details their use, and they're evident on the mark officer's jewels, which are almost identical symbols as the craft. 2 symbols, however, from the craft are given a special importance in the mark and are displayed here on the mark breast jewel. They're the mallet and chisel. We are told they are used operatively to indent the mark master's mark of approval of the work, more of which shortly. And they're used speculatively to emphasize the importance of discipline and education. And it's through these attributes that we may achieve approval from, well, I don't want to give too much away to those who are not yet mark master masons. So this nicely brings me to the links between the mark and the Royal Arch. Now, whereas the narrative link between the craft and Royal Arch centres on something lost in the first and then found in the second, that between the mark and the Royal Arch centres around something that is put in position in one and removed in the other, or so it would seem. The item that I refer to is the keystone, one of 2 symbols that appear in both these ceremonies, but which are not in the craft. The keystone is a fundamental necessity to the creation of an arch. The only allusions, however, in the arch to the craft ceremonies are first, visually on some versions of the 2nd and 3rd degree tracing boards. Secondly, verbally in the explanation of the 3rd degree tracing board, where brief reference is made to the dormer, part of the porchway. And lastly, by demonstration in the grand or royal sign. The keystone is not mentioned in any of these references and is not shown on any tracing board in the craft. And this suggests that the craft, which is concerned with squares, levels and perpendiculars, is not sufficient to complete the Masonic or allegorical journeys of building physical and spiritual temples. So at what point does the keystone appear in the Masonic ceremony, the Masonic story, and in the ritual? And the answer, of course, brethren, is in the mark. 18th century mark rituals refer to the need for a keystone to secure the roof of the vault beneath the sanctuary. At some point, the references in the ritual changed to what we have today. Now in the mark, the keystone is required to complete the sacred arch of King Solomon's temple. That is the entrance to the Sanctum Sanctorum. In later events of the Royal Arch ceremony, the candidate encounters a keystone. The keystone leads into the secret vault into which the genuine secrets of a master mason were long ago deposited. So it would be easy to assume that this is the same stone that was introduced in the mark degree. But how can that be? The keystone in today's mark ritual completed the arch leading to the Sanctum Sanctorum. It cannot have sealed the secret vault built beneath the surface of the temple. The answer to the conundrum is that the keystone referred to in the Royal Arch is that from the earlier mark rituals, the one completing the arch of the roof of the secret vault, what is referred to in Scotland as a plug. Remember, these ceremonies were all developed at around the same time and each had been refined by Dunkerley. We now know that there are in fact at least two actual keystones in today's ceremonies. One is within the sacred arch over the entrance to the Sanctum Sanctorum, and the other seals the secret vault into which the secrets are deposited. So to summarize, the narrative links between the mark and the Royal Arch. In the mark Master Mason's degree, the temple is completed by putting in place the keystone, an item needed in both the sacred arch and the secret vault. The genuine secrets are in the secret vault, sealed. In the Royal Arch, the keystone is removed, the secret vault is discovered, and the genuine secrets are restored. What is significant is that the keystone, the item needed to complete an arch and critical to the final step in the Masonic journey, the Royal Arch, is introduced in the mark degree, not in the craft. King Solomon's temple is completed in the mark, not the craft. So what is the symbolic significance of this item, the keystone? Whenever the arch and keystone appear, they indicate a special place, accessible or occupied only by those of the highest rank. Could this be how and why the grand or royal sign, a representation of an arch, acquired its name? It is as if the mark is increasing our awareness that something special and different is to come. And just as King Solomon's temple is completed in the mark and not the craft, so does our earthly development require a keystone to be put in position to complete the arch of our life. An inscription on the Royal Arch jewel tells us that nothing is wanted but the key, and it is the removal of the keystone that gives us entry to the secret vault and eventually to a revelation. The keystone symbolically links our earthly maturity, the reaching of our human potential, and our spiritual destiny, our realization of the deity. The other symbol that appears in both the mark and the Royal Arch, but not in the craft, is the equilateral triangle. In the mark, this is used as the mark master's mark of approval of the work, as being fitted for its place in the intended structure. The lecture on the mark tracing board explains the equilateral triangle is a symbol of the deity and suggests that it should teach us to strive, to perform our duty both to God and man, so that we may be found worthy to receive the approval of the great overseer of the universe. The triangle is used at the very center of the Grand Lodge of Master Mason's badge on its coat of arms, as you can see in the slide on the left. Within the Royal Arch, the equilateral triangle is found almost everywhere you look, including our jewels, aprons, banners, and at the very heart of the ceremony. It is central to the point of revelation, and it is what is found to what is found in the vault. It is clearly used as a symbol of the deity, and its prevalence underlines the spiritual nature of the Royal Arch. Again, it is a key feature in the logo of Supreme Grand Chapter. So, the arch, keystone, and the equilateral triangle link together our earthly maturity as achieved in the mark, and our spiritual dimension as discovered in the Royal Arch. They demonstrate that they are complementary parts of the same story. So to summarize, brethren, the craft, mark, and Royal Arch are all connected, and together they form one comprehensive whole. The journey begun by an apprentice in the craft is not finished in the 3rd degree, and it's in the mark that he achieves his earthly maturity. It increases his awareness, rewards his initiative and ingenuity, and it provides clues that there is something special and different to come. However, his earthly development only takes him so far, and it's in the Royal Arch that his journey reaches its ultimate destination, when he learns of his spiritual nature and his relationship with the Creator. On completion of this journey, as a reward for merit, he has come from being an apprentice, and he now becomes a member of the ruling Sanhedrin, a prince and ruler in the order. Brethren, unless we have some knowledge of all of these degrees, we cannot have a full understanding of the story, symbolism, or meaning of any of them. Each degree is itself part of the key that together unlocks the meaning of the others. So, brethren, these are what I consider to be the key narrative and symbolic links between the craft, mark, and the Royal Arch. I recognise that others will, of course, have different insights. But I now invite your questions, and I will do my very best to answer. But can I ask that the questions be brief and succinct so that we can cover as many questions as possible in the time available? And please also remember that some people present will not be Master Masons or Royal Arch companions. And I've drawn a very careful line so that I don't give so much away as to either ruin their enjoyment of the degrees when they are ultimately taken, or, of course, to reveal any secrets. So thank you, brethren. And if I can hand now back to Amit.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tony. Another great lecture. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Brilliant. We have got questions coming in. So if we could first go to Giovanni, please. Where are you, Giovanni?
Hi, Tony. Great completion to the first part. Just one simple question. I joined Masonry about 21 years ago, and 2 years later, I read about the mark, and I was curious. I wanted to know more about it. And when I spoke to my brothers in the craft, oh no, we don't go to mark. Google is against it. Blah 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 blah. And eventually, I joined the mark about 6 years ago. But I'm wondering, I wasted 14 years not joining the mark. Why, I mean, still as today, we are not supposed to put the pin of the mark when we go into lodge, From your chat, from your presentation, it seems like one cannot exist without the other. So why is still to this day, mark is an entity and craft is an entity? I still.
Well, thank you, Giovanni. I think I addressed these issues really in my first talk, and I don't want to take all the time revising all of those. So I'll give a summary answer. And first of all, may I say, UGLE is not against the mark, far from it. UGLE acknowledges and respects the mark and other progressive orders. And indeed, many senior Masons, senior members of UGLE, including rulers, are members of the mark and active supporters of the mark. And I can assure you that UGLE and indeed Supreme Grand Chapter is in no way against the mark.
No, now I know.
However, sorry, I'll just because I don't want to get bogged down in this issue, because I addressed the constitutional issues in the first talk, and I really want to move on to the narrative and symbolic, but I think it's a good opportunity to remind people of the point I made then, and that is United Grand Lodge and Supreme Grand Chapter are one organisation. Effectively, UGLE, or the Craft and the Royal Arch, are two sides of the same coin, and that was defined by the 1813 Act of Union. The Mark and other orders are separate sovereign bodies. They're separate organisations. And so they function under their own rules. They're self-governing, they're self-determining. So they cooperate between each other, but we must understand that because they're separate organisations, they don't have any jurisdiction over each other. And so the messages that you sometimes might get are simply because they're not part of the same organisation. We may think of Freemasonry as one thing, but actually Freemasonry is made up of many different organisations and constituent bodies. So I think in understanding our experiences in our craft lodges and our Royal Arch chapters, we need to understand that they are part of the same organisation, and just as you know, the Mark is a separate organisation, so you wouldn't expect to see one organisation talk extensively about another. So what we do is we talk about it from the perspective of an individual's journey, and that of course is what talks like this is going to do. I hope that addresses the issue. I'm very happy on another occasion to expand on that. But I was, you know, I'd really be rather keen if we focus on the narrative and symbolic issues. Giovanni, if you've still got questions about it, I'm happy to engage with you separately and privately.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, my friend.
My question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my friend.
Next, could we go to Paul Greek, please? Hi, Paul.
Hi, Paul.
Paul, you're on mute.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for all that. I was waiting for the second part of the lecture. But you highlighted at the beginning that the secrets were known to but the three Grand Masters. What I don't quite understand is why they didn't make provision if one of them died or became ill or whatever, so that somebody else could pick it up.
They did. What a wonderful, Paul, that's a great question. They did make provision. And what they actually did was they hid them in the secret vault. And there was only a very few number of people who had access to that vault. The people who built it were entrusted with another degree, which is picked up actually in another order. So, I mean, we're talking now about narrative. We're not talking about the historic development of organizations. We're right now into the story and the degree. And some of this story was developed after the Craft, Royal Arch and Mark themselves were developed to sort of backfill, a bit like an EastEnders spin-off, to fill in some gaps for us. And so we're told that that's exactly what happened, that the three Grand Masters of the building of King Solomon's Temple hid their, the secrets, or the means by which one could access the secrets, the means by which one could communicate them, within the secret vault. And of course, without us saying too much about what is found in the secret vault, the physical aspects to that, if you think about, I presume you're a Royal Arch Mason?
Yes.
So if you think about what is actually found in the secret vault, and the item at the center of the Royal Arch chapter, and what is found upon that, that's what the three Grand Masters had buried. Now, some narratives tell us that they actually placed their jewels upon that point, which is an interesting point. I've just been sent a paper by Tony Leeson, which I'm looking forward to reading, which expands upon this. So the answer is they did, and remember, King Solomon said, until such time as they should be rediscovered effectively. So thank you for the question, Paul.
But then, if King Solomon knew they were there, why didn't he just go and look in the vault instead of saying that the secrets were lost forever?
Well, because in order to be able to communicate them, you had to be a part of that higher class of the degree of Master Mason. Thank you.
Next, could we go to Alan in Brazil, please? Hi, Alan.
Oh, sorry. Oh, hi. Thank you, Tony, about
Thank
your
you.
talk. it's usual people to say, some of them believe that going to the mark first, it's interesting for some reasons. Others more traditional say that Royal Arch is more interesting for other stuff. So based on what you said today, what's your opinion? Do you think that would be more interesting for the guy go to the mark or to the Royal Arch, or as what we are dealing here? And I believe myself that for some brothers, it's better first go to mark, and for some first go to Royal Arch. I would like to know your personal opinion on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. This is a question that a lot of people ask, and let me start by saying that I am a very loyal Craft, Mark, and Royal Arch Mason. I love all three. I'm committed to all three, and they're the focus of my Masonic efforts, shall we say. And therefore, I do not engage in any conversation that sets the Mark or the Royal Arch against each other. I don't see that as being a productive conversation. There is no answer that says that one should join the Mark or the Royal Arch. What one can do is say what the positions are from different perspectives. So let's take some different perspectives. So the constitutional perspective that we all need to be aware of as craft masons, because we join through the craft, that's the beginning of our Masonic journey. So we are all members of the craft. So every craft mason needs to understand that the craft and the Royal Arch in England and Wales have a special indissoluble link, and that the Royal Arch is considered the completion of the journey begun in the craft, begun with initiation. And so we need to be encouraging all craft masons to complete that journey at the time which is appropriate and suitable for them. Now, in fact, the Grand Master has said that all masons should complete that journey before they consider joining anything else. And I think it's our responsibility, and as a Grand Officer, I consider it my responsibility, to make sure that Master Masons are aware of that position and take that into account when they make their individual decision. So that's one position. Another position is to consider that, in fact, the Mark and the Royal Arch are wonderfully complementary to each other. As I've pointed out, there's certain links between them which don't exist in the craft. It's almost as if they're in another part of the room together with the craft over here, sort of thing. Although you could make the same argument with each pair against the other three. So what is important, I think, to understand is that one is very practical and down to earth. It represents our earthly maturity, and the other one represents our spiritual. So we've got two very contrasting degrees here, or orders here, and they are like yin and yang. So some people are naturally inclined to, shall we say, a more practical, earthly enjoyment of ritual or of the environment or the ceremony or the context. Other people might find themselves more naturally drawn to the more spiritual. So inevitably, some people are going to find one thing accords with them or resonates with them more than the other. Then you've got another position which puts the man in the middle, a phrase that I'm fond of saying as a mentor. And this, I believe, is where we really need to think of what we as more mature Masons, more senior Masons, ought to be thinking about. What is in the best interest of the individual man? So think about him and his understanding of the craft and his progress. Put him first. Think about when he's ready to take another step, and think about what is an appropriate step for him. For me, I always point out to people the relationship between the craft and the Royal Arch. And if anybody was ever in a position where they thought they could only ever join one more thing, it should always be, to me, to go towards the Royal Arch. There have been occasions when, and although I would normally direct people towards the Royal Arch followed by the Mark, and I think of the Mark as what next, if you like, there have been occasions, I acknowledge, where I've been working to support a new Mason who I think, this man is not ready for the Royal Arch. And I know of at least one person who, because he was pushed into it too soon, it put him off joining anything else. And he personally would have been rather different in the mark. So I acknowledge there are some people who have that belief. I don't think it's appropriate that we should try to lay down the law about what is right for everybody. I would rather we acknowledge individual difference and individual readiness, and work with individuals to help them follow their journey, in the hope, obviously, that they will all reach that completion in the Royal Arch. But I do think it's important that all Master Masons understand the position of the craft on this matter. So thank you for the question, but I certainly won't be setting one against the other. Thank you.
Fantastic, and I'm really happy to know that we are really on the same page. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tony, we've got a fair few hands up here, so
yes,
let's go through them. Next, could I go to Jocelyn, please? Hi, Jocelyn.
Hello. Great lecture as usual.
Thank you,
I just want to reconfirm on the chronology of the events. So it's basically the second degree, then it's the Markman, then it's the third degree, and then it's the Mark Master. Is that correct?
I think it's an interesting question, and I think it's very difficult. There are elements if you compare the Mark Master Mason ceremony with the Master Mason ceremony, it's very clear to me that they happened in the same week. So in one, we're talking about the completion, effectively, the final stone, the topping out of King Solomon's Temple. In the other, we're confronted with three overseers, because they were of that superior class, three overseers who were anxious that the work was coming to a standstill. They hadn't yet received promotion to the next degree, and they were anxious about their own situation. So very clearly, they are in the Mark Master Mason degree and the Master Mason degree are very, very close together, and I suspect they're probably quite intertwined. Now, there is some suspicion that, or some belief, of course, that Hiram Abiff was present at the topping out ceremony, but so therefore that might be slightly earlier. But then there's other parts which suggest otherwise. So I've not yet come down on one view or the other. And of course, if they'd already put that stone in place, what was the work still going on? I guess tidying up, actually, and beautifying. Bear in mind, what was Hiram Abiff's job? It was to beautify the temple. So, you know, I'm not 100% certain myself on the exact timing between Mark Master Mason and Master Mason. What I would say, Josen, is this. The Mark does not complete the fellow craft. The Mark Man might do. I can buy that, but not Mark Master Mason. Thank you.
My question was just because if you see the closing of the Mark degree, a different name is mentioned.
Yes.
So.
Yes, and of course, yeah, and of course that links into the installation ceremony, which is clearly, you know, further on again. So let's try to keep it simple, bearing in mind that we have Master Masons on this. So I'm trying to be very careful as to how far we go. But thank you, Josen.
Thanks, Jocelyn.
Thanks, Amit.
Next, could we go to Andrew Armbruster, please? Hi, Andrew.
Did you see me anxiously trying to unmute? Hi, Tony. Thank you very much. I thought an excellent lecture, which really outlined why the Mark is the fourth regular step. Albeit brethren are quite happily making irregular steps. When I've spoken to particularly older brethren who are Master Masons and Royal Arch companions, but not Mark men, they can be quite sniffy about the Mark. And your presentation outlined a much deeper meaning to it in achieving earthly maturity. I wonder whether in characterising the Mark often as the happy degree, the friendly degree, the fun degree, we're actually underselling it. First of all, I don't know whether your first comment was a statement of your belief as to which sequence to take them. That's another matter. Well, as you know, it's part of the ritual. But
addressing the point you're making, I think in some parts of the country we have different. You know, there are clearly different attitudes to the Mark in different parts of the country. And some of those are quite deep rooted. And I know, you know, in my home province, where I live and where I've had a lot of active involvement, there was some years ago quite an anti-mark feeling, and that was changed effectively by a craft PGM. And the mark is now a very strong part of that province. So whether we undersell it by referring to it as the happy degree, I hope that's not underselling. In the address to the brethren in the craft installation, we talk about the purpose of Freemasonry, the grand design of Freemasonry being the pursuit of happiness, effectively. So I think maybe sometimes the mark can come across as being a bit frivolous if the ceremony is not conducted appropriately. We know that there's parts of the mark ceremony that raise a smile. That should never be a reason to be undignified or to ridicule or to introduce something that's inappropriate. And maybe that has contributed towards it in some respects. I think what's more important, Andrew, is that those of us who do believe that the mark is an important part of it's one of the principal degrees of Freemasonry and is a key to understanding the craft and the Royal Arch, is that's what we promote. And I'm very happy for people to repeat my assertion that the King Solomon's Temple is not completed in the craft, it's completed in the mark. And there are aspects of essential to the completion of that, and namely the arch, which we do not see in the craft. So it's only by the introduction of the arch that we actually get to that element and that link, that bridge, if you like, into the Royal Arch.
Anyway, thank you. You give me some different words for explanation in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrew. Always great to see you. Next, could we go to Blake, please? Hi, Blake.
Hi, Tony. Thanks very much for that. It was a fantastic lecture.
Thank you.
Especially what you're saying about at the end there, in answering Paul's question about Hiram beautifying the temple. That clicked a few things in me. And I was going to ask something about the Worshipful Mark Master, the installation ceremony, but I thought it might be a little bit too
be careful how far
revealing.
You go.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I thought I'd be more controversial and ask what your thoughts are on the Rose Car degrees for the narrative sake, going where they expand more upon the lost secrets and who succeeds from Hiram and all that kind of stuff. Would you say that is a necessary addition, or is that more of a side story that you could put into it if you wanted to?
Okay, what a good question. Now I should explain that I'm not active in the Rose Car. I have been a member. I don't have an active membership at the moment. And when I was active, I did attend a lot of the demonstrations of the intermediate degrees. And I'm aware that a number of the intermediate degrees are very close and very similar to those in other orders, and specifically the Allied and Royal and Select and one or two others. So the way I see those is that I consider, and this is a personal view, and I know that other people will see things differently. I consider that the Craft Mark and Royal Arch are the fundamental building blocks of Freemasonry. That both the narrative and the symbolic meanings were largely developed in that 18th century period. And there were major contributors to that, including Thomas Dunkley and William Preston and Desaguliers and so forth. Many of the other degrees and many of those other fill-in bits that I alluded to earlier were developed at a later period. And that's why they are not, in my view, they don't have quite the same status. Now, that isn't to diminish their meaning. It isn't to diminish their symbolism or their philosophical meaning in any means whatsoever. I recognise, I'm a member of the Allied, and I have a great deal of enjoyment of the Allied, and I find the Allied being so diverse. It's almost like it gives you what I was referring to earlier in one order. You know, that difference between practical down to earth and that more philosophical and spiritual, all in one order. So I recognise that these other elements, which are developed in other degrees and other orders and other rites, such as the ancient and accepted rite, have an important part to play. They develop the story, they develop the philosophy, the morality, the symbolism, the philosophy, the spirituality. Now, of course, when you talk about Rose-Croix does have Rosicrucian elements to it. So you're getting another stream of influence coming in, which is not traditional Masonic, but which is very recognizable to us who are Freemasons. I don't know whether that answers your question, Blake. It's probably the best answer I can give right now, without sitting down poring over ritual books with you.
It does. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Looking forward to part 3.
Well, yes, part 3. It could be the talk I alluded to, which is, and I'll put this out here very quickly, and I'm conscious that other people want to ask questions, but I've been doing a lot of work on my own interpretation of the Royal Arch and how everything that flows into the Royal Arch, specifically from the craft and the mark, culminate in that. And so I'm doing a lot of work in that area at the moment. So if there's going to be a part 3, that will be what it is. Thank you.
Thanks, Blake, as always. Next, could we go to Ted? Hi, Ted. You're on mute, Ted. Ted, you're on mute.
I'm off mute now.
You are.
Am I not?
Yes, you are, Ted, yes.
You're back on mute, Ted.
Ted, you've muted yourself again.
One
click. That's it.
There I go.
That's it.
I'll learn this machine sooner or later. I want to compliment you, Tony, for that fantastic narrative that took you less than 30 minutes. And I have not seen such a fine description in many years through in my travels of Royal Arch. Of course, we don't make the distinction with the Mark Mason degrees, because we incorporate that into the New York Grand Lodge. The Royal Arch incorporates the Mark degree, and I could never understand the division when I came in contact with your constitution and other constitutions other than ours. The dignity with which they held the Mark Mason degree and the superiority of the Mark Mason degree to all three. And it was highlighted to me when I went to a centennial dinner and went out from the dinner to the bar to get some drinks for the table. And sitting outside was the Grand Master, the most worshipful Grand Master. And I said, "Oh, are you taking a break?" I said, "Are you making an entrance?" And he said, "No, we weren't invited to because when I inquired, they said, 'Oh, we have our own Grand Master.'" We don't make that distinction in New York. And I was wondering if you had ever read Pierre Vaughan's lessons on the Royal Arch.
I don't think I have.
I will dispatch them to you as soon as I can get a copy.
I'm absorbing Royal Arch material at a pace at the moment. A lot of my work is focusing on the Royal Arch, and I would certainly like to read what you want to send me. But just responding to what you're saying, Ted, bear in mind that we have quite a fragmented system here, and that's as a historical quirk. I don't think anybody would suggest that we would, if we were starting with a blank sheet of paper today, we would invent what we now have. But given what we have, it's very difficult to change it, and it's part of our English quirkiness. I was talking with Graham Redman the other day. There's a name-dropping issue for you to clarify something, and I mentioned the word anomaly, and he said, "Well, so much of our Freemasonry is full of anomalies, and we wouldn't want to remove all of them." So it's a strange anomaly. It's a strange anomaly.
A singular anomaly, yes.
But thank you, Ted, for your very kind words. They really mean something. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Next, could we go to Paul Burgess, please? Hi, Paul.
Hi there. Thanks, Tony. That was a really enlightening talk. I was particularly interested what you had to say about the Mark degree consisting of 2 separate degrees. And I just wondered, do you think that the narrative would be improved if that distinction was made a lot clearer during the advancement ceremony?
Do I think it would be? Okay. I mean, to me, it is pretty clear because the candidate, again, we've got to be careful how far we go here, but the candidate comes in as a fellow craft. He's asked whether he was given a mark. He says no, and he selects a mark, and he's made a marked man. And you know, he's told that the degree of marked man is now conferred upon him. And then he's told that for the better elucidation of the secrets of this degree, it's necessary that you should, you know, effectively retire and then be readmitted and so forth. And it's told to him again later that he's got another, you know, there's a second degree within that ceremony. So I'm not certain that we'd want to, I personally wouldn't want to make changes within the ritual. Maybe what we need to do ourselves as you know, Masonic mentors and educators, if you like, is to remind people of that more often. There's no, I mentioned in the first talk that the degree of marked man contains elements from operative practice, and clearly and you know, there was reference in the Shore statutes to the issuing of a mark. So it clearly is of old origin. The degree of Marked Master Mason, again, as I explained in the first talk, developed much later in the middle 18th century. And so they're quite separate in terms of their origins. And I see no reason why we shouldn't make more to remind people that there are, in fact, 2 stages. But I wouldn't want to mess around with the ritual too much in doing that. But good question, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Next, our final question is from John Harris. Hi, John.
Hello, John.
You're on mute.
Right, I'm up now. Tony, first of all, thank you very much indeed for a most interesting paper. I've got two things. First of all, I was always told at one time that the Royal Arch is the completion of the 3rd degree. Now, a certain Yasha Beresina says it's not. The late Joe Ellman says it is. What is your opinion, please? And
thank you, John.
I've got another question to ask.
Well, let's deal with that one first, if I may, John, because I won't remember it quite so clearly, and you've expressed it very clearly. When I was made a Royal Archmason, and this isn't the answer to Amit's original question about my origins, by the way. When I was made a Royal Archmason in 1994, I was told that the Royal Arch was the completion of the 3rd degree. I was told in the ritual, you might consider that you have today taken another degree in Freemasonry. I'm paraphrasing slightly. You have not. It is the 3rd completed. The origin of that statement goes back to the middle of the 19th century. The word completion was not used in the Act of Union. It was not used in the declaration that defines pure ancient Masonry as the 3 degrees of the craft and that of the Holy Supreme Order of the Holy Royal Arch. The word completion does not appear in that. The word including is used. And so round about sometime around about the time of the definition of the ritual in 1834, people started to refer to the Royal Arch as the completion of the 3rd. Now, it's my belief that it was their interpretation of the 2nd sentence in the Act of Union. Now, if you look at that sentence and differently, and if you look at Douglas Burford's Batham lecture, where he studies the physical document itself, and he's highlighted, and in my first lecture I drew attention to this, he's highlighted that that document was amended, and that the original document would have said something rather different. It would have referred to 4 degrees, being the 3 of the craft, and the supreme degree of the Holy Royal Arch. So this suggestion that the Holy Royal Arch is the completion of the 3rd is not an original suggestion. It's a later interpretation, and it continued through a lot of changes up until the review that was undertaken by Supreme Grand Chapter under the leadership, I think it was under the leadership of George Francis. I may be corrected on that, but at the end of 2003, it was clarified by United Grand Lodge and Supreme Grand Chapter that the Royal Arch is not considered to be the completion of the 3rd degree. It's considered to be the completion, as it says in the Act of Union, the completion of pure ancient masonry. So we can think of pure ancient masonry as composing of 2 parts. If we think of pure ancient masonry as an umbrella entity, under which are the 3 degrees of the craft and the Holy Royal Arch. Now, if you actually then start breaking those down, there's some interesting parallels or some interesting balances. So you've got three degrees and 1 installation in the craft. You've got 1 degree, and it is a degree in the Royal Arch, and 3 installations. And there's lots of different ways of balancing that. So what I believe, and this is the position of Supreme Grand Chapter, is that the Holy Royal Arch is the completion of pure ancient masonry. It's the completion of the journey that was begun with initiation. It is not the completion of 1 specific degree. And that is the position now of Supreme Grand Chapter. If you remember, there were some changes to the ritual and a mandatory change to the ritual to remove, I think it was 27 words, the 27 words that I referred to a couple of minutes ago. And I'm very clear on this. My reading of the Act of Union and my reading of Masonic history since fully supports the idea that the Royal Arch is the completion of pure ancient masonry, of the journey that was begun with initiation. It is not part of the 3rd degree. I've even looked at the earliest ritual we have for the 3rd degree, Samuel Pritchard's Masonry Dissected. I've looked at the exact wording of it. There's no reference to anything that can be thought of as the Royal Arch. And so the 3rd degree is a complete degree in itself, and the Royal Arch is a complete degree in itself. So that's my answer to you, John.
Thank you very much. The other thing was, if you go on to the 3rd degree and you look at the coffin, there are 3 letters, Hebrew letters on the coffin, and they're all the Hay. The Hay is the 5th letter in the Jewish alphabet.
Yes.
So consequently, we're back to 15. We were talking about 5 before. Now we're back to 15.
Yes.
It's just a statement, because on the picture that you show of the coffin, it doesn't show the 3 5s. Oh, I just spotted two Hays.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's another down here.
Where? Oh, all right then. Sorry, I didn't see that one. Can I thank you very much indeed again?
Well, thank you, John. And I mean, you're taking me to my limits now, and I thank you for that. Can I be honest? I think I need to do a lot more work myself on the 3rd degree tracing board, and there are references in this, and there are references also within the Royal Arch itself, and what would have originally been at the centre of the Royal Arch ceremony. Well, sorry, not at the centre of the Royal Arch ceremony, but the centre of what would have been in the vault. And so, you're pointing me to some further areas of research and understanding myself, for which I thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And brethren, thank you all again for questions. Fantastic, some fantastic questions there, right, Tony?
Absolutely. I mean, when you start something like this, you don't quite know what you're going to get asked. There's 1 or 2 questions which I think anybody who speaks on these subjects can expect to get asked, and there were elements of that in here, but they were asked in such a good way and such a stretching way. Let me tell you, when I take on to do a talk like that, I know I'm going to be stretched, and especially by this audience, which is great.
why we love them, seeing everybody so much. Brilliant. Thank you once again, Tony. Brethren, before we go, I don't want to forget this, but the two winners for the question, or the answer to the question, was indeed 1991. Is that correct, Tony?
It was June 1991, yes.
So many congratulations to brothers Bob Ray and Gary Monday. Well done to you both.
Oh well, well, Gary and I share one of our lodges, so but I don't think he would have been in a position to have known that. Maybe he's been reading up on me. I don't know. Fantastic! Congratulations, brethren.
I mean, there were some that pitched you younger, and there were some that pitched you older, Tony.
I know. I know who it was, and I shall have words with him. But somebody put me in the 19th century there, so.
Brethren, for all those who remain on the group, thank you so much for your attention and your support. Another wonderful lecture, I'm sure you'll all agree. Next week, Blake, you might enjoy this. We have most puissant brother Alan Englefield, sovereign or third degree sovereign grand commander of the ancient and accepted rite, coming on. We're welcoming him next week, and he will be giving us an introduction to the order. So very much one to look out for. Once again, it'll be 6 o'clock next week on Tuesday, the 18th. Brethren, all that's left for me to say is good night, God bless, stay safe. Thank you.
I'm sure Alan will give you a form, Tony.
Peace to all.
There's somebody else on this call who's anxious for me to join his chapter as well, his Rose Croix chapter as well.
I was always taught when I was a young Mason, if you ask a senior Mason if you had to give up everything except one order,